The silver fork hit the porcelain plate with a sound like a gunshot, signaling the end of my life as a martyr in my own home. My son, Marcus, did not whisper the ultimatum, nor did he offer it as a suggestion cloaked in the false warmth of family concern. He barked the command with a chilling finality that stripped away my dignity in front of the very people I had spent my entire life protecting. "You either give Beatrice the master suite or you start looking for a suitcase," he shouted, his face reddening with a misplaced sense of authority that made my blood run cold. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the same table where I had served him thousands of meals, where I had comforted him after his father passed, and where I now realized I was no longer a mother, but an obstacle to be moved. Beatrice sat beside him, her fingers laced together over her napkin, a small and calculated smirk playing on her lips as she watched the destruction of my boundaries with the detached interest of a spectator at a play. My sister-in-law, Clara, suddenly found the pattern on the wallpaper fascinating, her eyes darting away to avoid the carnage of the moment. My granddaughter, Sophie, bit her lips so hard, I feared she might draw blood, her youthful face clouded with a mixture of confusion and shame. Yet she remained silent. No one moved to defend me. No one spoke a word of protest against the injustice of a son threatening to exile his 72-year-old mother from her own sanctuary. And in that heavy, suffocating silence I, Evelyn Vance, felt something fundamental within my soul snap, replaced by a clarity so sharp it was almost blinding. For decades, I had been the silent architect of their comfort, the one who smoothed the wrinkles of their lives, while my own grew more jagged with every passing year. I looked at Marcus and saw a stranger, a man I had raised to be kind, who had instead become a colonizer of my peace. I realized then that I had been a ghost in my own hallways, a provider who had provided so much that there was nothing left for herself. I did not cry, for tears felt like a currency I had already spent in excess on their behalf. I did not scream, for my voice had been muffled by their demands for too long to be raised in futile anger. Instead, I took a slow, measured breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs for the first time in years. I carefully placed my silverware down, the metal clicking softly against the plate, and I looked Marcus directly in the eyes with a gaze that finally saw him for exactly who he was. "That is perfectly fine, Marcus," I said, my voice coming out with a steady, haunting calmness that seemed to unnerve him more than any shout could have. "I think it is time I started packing my bags." The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was a physical weight that pressed against the walls of the dining room. Marcus blinked, his mouth hanging slightly open, as if he had prepared for a battle of words and found himself punching at shadows. He had expected me to beg, to plead for the mercy of a smaller room, or perhaps to weep about my memories. Beatrice's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise that quickly turned back into a cold, hard mask of indifference. Clara cleared her throat, the sound echoing like a dry branch snapping in the woods, and Sophie looked up at me with wide, shimmering eyes that were filled with an unexpected spark of hope. I stood up with a grace I hadn't felt in a decade, my spine straightening with the rediscovered weight of my own worth. I folded my linen napkin with meticulous care, smoothed the front of my blouse, and walked out of the room without looking back. I could feel their eyes burning into my shoulder blades, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care about the judgment of those who only valued me for what I could give them. That night, while the house hummed with the muffled sounds of their awkward realization, I sat on the edge of my bed in the room that was now officially a contested territory. I wasn't paralyzed by fear or drowning in sorrow. I was on my phone, my thumb scrolling with a purpose I hadn't felt since I was a young woman starting her first accounting firm. I remembered a message my dearest friend Martha had sent me months ago. It was a link to a listing for a cedar-shingled cottage on the rugged coast of Oregon, a place where the air smelled of salt and the waves sang a song of ancient, unbothered strength. Martha had joked that we should buy it and spend our final years drinking gin and watching the whales migrate, and back then I had merely sent a laughing emoji dismissing it as a beautiful, impossible dream. But tonight, as the fake laughter of my family drifted through the floorboards from the living room, that dream felt like the only reality worth holding on to. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, with a view of the white-capped horizon, and a price tag that was substantial, but well within the reach of a woman who had spent 40 years managing other people's fortunes while quietly securing her own. My savings were a secret garden I had tended to for a lifetime. I had been an independent accountant when the world told women to stay in the kitchen, and I had been a shrewd investor when the world told widows to let their sons handle the money. Every dollar I had saved was a drop of sweat from late nights at my desk, a sacrifice of a vacation I never took, or a luxury I denied myself so that Marcus could have the best of everything. I had paid for his elite university, his first car that he crashed within a month, his lavish wedding to Beatrice that cost more than my first house, and the countless bailouts for their failed business ventures. I opened my banking app, the glow of the screen illuminating the lines on my face, and I saw the numbers. I had more than enough. I had enough to buy my freedom twice over. For the first time in my existence, I felt the terrifying, exhilarating dizziness of realization. This money is mine, and I am finally going to spend it on the woman who earned it. At 7 o'clock the following morning, I was already awake, dressed in a sharp navy blazer and pearls, sitting by the window as the sun began to bleed through the gray Seattle clouds. I called the real estate agent for the coastal property. A woman named Sarah answered, her voice sounding crisp and professional. I told her I wanted to see the house that very day. There was a moment of silence on her end, likely because it was a 3-hour drive, and the house was a significant investment, but then she agreed to meet me at noon. I hung up the phone and felt as though I had crossed a border into a country where I finally spoke the language. When Marcus came downstairs at 9, looking disheveled and smelling of expensive coffee he hadn't made, he frowned at me sitting on the sofa. He expected me to be in the kitchen flipping pancakes and apologizing for the tension of the previous night. "Is breakfast not ready yet?" he asked, his voice tinged with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been told no. "No," I replied, not moving an inch. "I am going out for the day." He huffed a sound of pure irritation and pulled the refrigerator door open so hard the jars rattled inside. "Well, don't be gone long," he said over his shoulder. "Beatrice needs you to drop her car at the mechanic and then take her to that new boutique downtown." I stood up, grabbing my keys from the side table. "I won't be able to do that," I said, my voice as cool as the morning mist. Marcus turned around, a half-eaten piece of toast in his hand, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean you won't be able to?" "It's Saturday. I simply won't," I repeated, and I walked out the front door before he could find the words to argue. The drive to the coast was a symphony of liberation. I rolled the windows down, letting the damp, evergreen-scented air of the Pacific Northwest whip through my hair. I played a playlist of jazz and old blues, the kind of music my late husband had loved, but Marcus had always complained was too depressing. For the first time in years, I wasn't driving to the grocery store or the pharmacy or the dry cleaners for someone else. I was driving toward a horizon that belonged to me. The highway wound through the mountains and then finally opened up to the vast gray majesty of the ocean. I arrived at the cottage exactly on time. Sarah was waiting for me, a woman in her late 40s who looked like she appreciated the value of a quiet life. She didn't try to oversell me. She simply opened the door and let the house speak for itself. It was perfect. The floors were wide-planked oak, the fireplace was made of local river stone, and the windows in the living room were so large they felt like they were holding the ocean in their frames. I stood on the wooden deck, feeling the spray of the sea on my cheeks, and I knew. I didn't need a master suite in a house where I was disrespected. I needed a sanctuary where I was the queen of my own solitude. "What do you think, Mrs. Vance?" Sarah asked, joining me on the deck. "I think I would like to buy it," I said, not even hesitating. Sarah blinked, her professional poise slipping for a moment. Most people want to bring their families back for a second viewing, or they want to sleep on a decision of this magnitude. I've spent 72 years sleeping on decisions that were made for the benefit of others. I told her, my voice firm, "This is the first decision I am making for myself, and I am quite certain I won't lose a wink of sleep over it." I signed the initial paperwork on the small kitchen island, the wood smooth beneath my fingers. The price was $480,000. It was a king's ransom for a cottage, but it was a pittance for a new life. I told her I wanted to close as quickly as possible, and she informed me that since it was an all-cash offer with no contingencies, we could have the keys in my hand within 72 hours. I walked back to my car, the temporary keys feeling like a heavy golden weight in my palm, and I looked back at the house one last time. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise I was finally keeping to the young girl I used to be. I drove back to the city with a sense of deliberate peace. When I walked through the front door of my house, the air felt thick with a tension I had once found unbearable, but now found almost comical. Marcus was in the living room, his laptop open, looking like he was working, but likely just browsing social media. Beatrice was in the kitchen, her voice loud and sharp, as she complained to someone on her cell phone about how difficult it was to find good help these days. They both looked up as I entered, their expressions sour. "Where have you been?" Marcus demanded. "Beatrice had to take an Uber, and she's furious." I didn't answer him. I walked straight up the stairs, past the room they were so eager to claim, and entered my temporary bedroom. I closed the door and began to pack. I didn't take everything. I took the things that had a soul. I took the framed photographs of my parents, the clock my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary, the quilt my grandmother had stitched by hand, and my favorite books. The rest, the expensive furniture, the sets of china I only used for their benefit, the heavy curtains, they could have it all. It was just wood and fabric, and it felt haunted by the years of my own subservience. The next morning, I contacted a woman named Eleanor Thorne. Eleanor was a legend in the local legal community, a woman who had built a reputation for being as sharp as a razor and twice as cold when it came to property law. We met in her office, which was filled with the comforting scent of old paper and expensive espresso. I told her everything: the dinner, the ultimatum, the purchase of the cottage, and my desire to sell the family home. Eleanor listened with a focused intensity, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad with a rhythmic scratching sound. When I finished, she looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You realize, Evelyn, that by selling this house, you are effectively ending your son's residency here. He has no legal claim to the property, but the social fallout will be significant." I looked at the rain streaking against her office window. "The fallout began the moment my son told me to pack my bags in my own house, Eleanor. I am simply finishing what he started." Eleanor nodded, a small approving smile touching her lips. "Then we shall proceed. I want it listed quietly," I added. "I want it sold to someone who will love it, and I want the closing to happen as fast as the law allows." For the next few days, I lived a double life. I played the role of the quiet, compliant mother, while secretly coordinating the sale of the century. I met with real estate agents while Marcus was at work, and Beatrice was at the gym. I showed the house to pre-approved buyers who moved through the rooms like ghosts, unaware of the drama simmering beneath the surface. I found a young couple architects who saw the potential in the old Victorian bones, and promised to preserve its history. They made an offer that was $50,000 over the asking price cash, and they wanted to move in within 2 weeks. I accepted it before the ink on the contract was even dry. Every time I looked at Marcus or Beatrice, I felt a strange sense of pity. They were so confident in their victory, so certain that they had finally broken me. They had moved their designer clothes into my old bedroom, rearranging the furniture, and tossing out my old rugs, as if they were clearing out a hotel room for a new guest. Marcus didn't even ask me if I was okay sleeping in the small, cramped guest room. He simply assumed I had accepted my fate as a secondary character in his life. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Beatrice came into the kitchen, a list in her hand, her eyes bright with a greedy sort of excitement. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Marcus and I are hosting a dinner party on Saturday to celebrate our new move-in. I need you to go to the high-end market across town and pick up these items." She handed me a list that included Wagyu steaks, vintage wine, and specific floral arrangements that cost more than a month's worth of groceries. "And who is paying for this gala event?" I asked, not even looking at the paper. Beatrice laughed a sharp metallic sound. "Well, you are, of course. It's your house, and you're the one who wants us to feel welcome, right?" I folded the list into a tiny, perfect square and handed it back to her. "I am afraid I won't be able to do that, Beatrice. If you want to throw a party, you will have to find the funds within your own accounts." Beatrice's face went pale, then a mottled, angry red. "Excuse me? Marcus said you would be cooperative." "Marcus is mistaken," I said, walking past her to the refrigerator to get a glass of water. "And frankly, so are you." The explosion happened that evening when Marcus returned home. I could hear them arguing in the master suite, my master suite, their voices muffled but the vitriol clear. Finally, Marcus stomped down the stairs, his face a mask of indignation. "Mom, what is this nonsense about the party? Beatrice is humiliated." I sat in my armchair, a book in my lap, looking up at him with a level of detachment that I knew infuriated him. "I am not a line of credit, Marcus. I am your mother, though you seem to have forgotten that. You are being incredibly selfish lately," he shouted, pacing the length of the rug. "We are trying to make a life here, to build something as a family, and you are acting like a spoiled child because we asked for a better room." "A better room," I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded more attention than his yelling. "You didn't ask, Marcus. You threatened me. You told me to pack my bags." "And so I did." He stopped pacing, his eyes darting to the stairs. "What does that mean?" "It means I took your advice," I said. "I have made arrangements. I am leaving." Marcus let out a scoff that was intended to be mocking, but sounded more like a gasp of fear. "Leaving. Where are you going to go? You can't survive on your own. You're 72 years old. You need us." I stood up, the book sliding off my lap onto the floor. "I have survived a lot of things, Marcus. I survived the loss of your father. I survived the recession that nearly took my firm. And I survived 30 years of your constant, ungrateful demands. I think I will manage just fine in a house where the people actually want me there." He stepped toward me, his voice softening into that manipulative tone he used whenever he wanted something. "Mom, don't be dramatic. I was stressed. I didn't mean it." "We love having you here." "You don't love having me here," I said, walking toward the door. "You love having a servant who pays the mortgage." There is a difference. I spent the next 3 days in a whirlwind of activity. Martha came over with her SUV and we loaded the boxes I had hidden in the garage. We made several trips to a storage unit, laughing like teenagers every time Marcus's car wasn't in the driveway. Martha was my rock, her constant stream of jokes and encouragement, keeping the lingering shadows of guilt at bay. "You're doing it, Evie," she whispered as we locked the storage unit for the last time. "You're finally jumping off the cliff." "I'm not jumping, Martha," I replied. I'm finally learning how to fly. On Thursday morning, I met the buyers at Eleanor's office for the final signing. I watched as the deed to the house I had lived in for 40 years was transferred to a new family. I held the check for $750,000 in my hand, and I felt a weight lift off my chest so suddenly I nearly gasped for air. It was done. The house was no longer mine, and by extension, it was no longer Marcus's sanctuary either. I returned home one last time to collect my final suitcase. Marcus and Beatrice were in the living room looking smug. They had clearly convinced themselves that my talk of leaving was just a bluff, a desperate bid for attention that they would ignore until I fell back into line. "Where have you been all day?" Beatrice asked, not looking up from her magazine. "I was out finalizing some business," I said, picking up my purse. Marcus stood up, his arms crossed. "Good, because we've decided to forgive your behavior this week. We're still having the party on Saturday, but we'll handle the food if you pay for the wine." I looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the man he could have been. "I won't be paying for the wine, Marcus, and I won't be here for the party." He rolled his eyes. "Here we go again with the drama. Where are you going to go, Mom? A hotel?" "No," I said, my voice ringing out in the quiet house. "I am going to my new home on the coast. And as for this house, you have until Sunday at noon to vacate the premises." The silence that followed was unlike any other. It was the silence of a structure collapsing in on itself. Marcus's arms dropped to his sides. "Vacate? What are you talking about? This is our home." "No, Marcus," I said, pulling the legal notice from my purse and laying it on the coffee table. "This was my home, and I sold it this morning. The new owners are moving in on Monday. They were very clear that they want the house empty by Sunday afternoon." Beatrice screamed a high-pitched, jagged sound that echoed through the hallways. "You sold the house. You can't sell the house. We live here. You live here because I allowed it," I said, my voice hardening. "But you told me to pack my bags, Marcus. You told me that my presence was conditional on my submission. I simply decided to take my house with me when I left." Marcus grabbed the papers, his hands shaking so violently he could barely read them. "This isn't legal. I'll sue you." "I'll go ahead," I said. "My attorney is Eleanor Thorne. I think you'll find that her work is impeccable. The house was in my name, the mortgage was paid by my hand, and the sale is as ironclad as my resolve." I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors one last time. Marcus followed me, his voice cracking, his anger turning into a desperate, hollow pleading. "Mom, wait! You can't do this! We have nowhere to go! Our apartment is gone. We spent our savings on the new furniture for the master suite. You're leaving your own son on the street." I stopped at the door and turned to look at him. "I am not leaving you on the street, Marcus. I am leaving you with the consequences of your own actions. You are a 45-year-old man with a job and a wife. You will do what every other adult does. You will find a way. Perhaps you can return that furniture to pay for a deposit on a rental. Or perhaps Beatrice's family can help you. But you will no longer do it at the expense of my life." I walked out the door and into the cool, gray Seattle afternoon. I didn't look back as I heard Beatrice's muffled wails or Marcus's shouts. I got into my car where Martha was waiting for me in the passenger seat with a thermos of hot coffee and a wide, knowing grin. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready?" I said. We drove away from the city, leaving behind the ghosts of my old life and the wreckage of a son's arrogance. The 3-hour drive felt like minutes. When we reached the coast, the sun was setting, casting a brilliant, fiery orange light across the water. We pulled into the driveway of the cottage, and I stepped out, the sound of the waves filling my ears like a long-awaited applause. I walked up to the front door, inserted my key, and felt the lock turn with a satisfying heavy thud. The next few days were a blur of peace and hard work. Martha stayed with me, helping me arrange the few pieces of furniture I had bought and hanging my precious photographs. We didn't talk much about Marcus. There was no need. His absence was a presence in itself, a quiet space that I was filling with my own interests. I spent my mornings walking on the beach, my toes sinking into the wet, cold sand, and my afternoons reading by the fire. I joined a local bridge club and met women who, like me, had rediscovered themselves in their later years. We shared stories of survival and triumph, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a community that didn't demand anything from me other than my company. One evening, about a month after I had moved, my phone rang. It was Sophie, my granddaughter. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Grandma?" She whispered, her voice sounding small and far away. "Hello, Sophie," I said, my heart softening. "How are you?" "I'm okay," she said. "I'm at my friend's house. Dad and Beatrice moved into a tiny apartment downtown. It's not very nice. Dad is working 2 jobs, and Beatrice is crying a lot. I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I realized with a start that I truly was. I didn't want them to suffer. I just didn't want to suffer for them anymore. "Grandma, can I come and see you?" Sophie asked. "I really miss you, and I want to see the ocean." My eyes filled with tears, the good kind that wash away the salt of old wounds. "Of course you can, Sophie. You are always welcome here. You can stay in the guest room as long as you like. We'll walk on the beach, and I'll teach you how to bake that lemon tart you like." After I hung up, I sat on my deck and watched the moon rise over the Pacific. I thought about the lesson I had learned so late in life. We often mistake sacrifice for love, and we mistake submission for duty. But true love requires respect, and a family that does not respect its elders is a house built on sand. I had been a mother for 45 years, but I had only been a woman for 30 days. And as I listened to the waves crashing against the shore, I knew that the shore didn't mind the violence of the water because it knew its own strength. I was the shore, and I was finally beautifully at peace. Life at the coast settled into a rhythm that felt less like a retirement and more like a rebirth. I spent my days exploring the tide pools, marveling at the tiny, resilient creatures that clung to the rocks despite the constant battering of the sea. I realized that I was not so different from them. I had clung to the rocks of my old life, terrified that if I let go, I would be swept away into the abyss. But now that I had let go, I found that I wasn't drowning. I was floating. I was swimming. I was part of the vast, interconnected world that existed beyond the narrow walls of Marcus's expectations. Sophie came to visit that following weekend. When she stepped off the bus, she looked older, more grounded. We spent the days talking about her future, her dreams of becoming a marine biologist, and the complexities of her parents' lives. She told me that Marcus had stopped shouting, his anger replaced by a quiet, brooding realization of what he had lost. "He's different, Grandma," she said as we sat by the fire one night. "He looks at your empty chair at their tiny table, and he doesn't say anything, but I think he's finally starting to understand." "I hope he does, Sophie," I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "Not because I need him to apologize, but because he needs to grow up. For his own sake and for yours." The humanistic lesson of my journey was not one of revenge, though it may have looked that way to those who didn't understand the depth of my exhaustion. It was a lesson in the sanctity of the self. We are taught that mothers must be endless wells of giving, that our value is measured by how much of ourselves we can pour into others until we are dry and hollow. But a well that is never replenished eventually becomes a pit. By reclaiming my life, I wasn't just saving myself. I was showing Sophie and even Marcus that a life of dignity is a choice we must make for ourselves. I was showing them that boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out, but gates that allow us to decide who is worthy of entering our sanctuary. The years ahead of me may be fewer than the years behind, but they are mine. Every sunrise over the gray Atlantic, every cup of tea shared with Martha, and every letter from Sophie is a testament to the fact that it is never too late to demand the respect you deserve. I am Evelyn Vance, and I am no longer a ghost. I am the woman who bought the beach house, the woman who walked away, and the woman who finally learned that the most important person to take care of was the one I had ignored for far too long. In the end, we are all architects of our own destiny, and I have finally built a home that is strong enough to withstand any storm.